Where do the reports come from? Did you get an initial?
One PodVader.
That's football.
Every angle of the NFL covered.
All that kind of stuff, I get it.
This,
no question about it,
is Next Fan Up.
We're going to unleash hell here in December.
Hello and welcome to another wonderful division preview from your friends here at the Next Fan Up podcast. Hey everybody, PodVader. We are previewing the NFC South today, and it's a very interesting division. Much like the AFC South, this will be a hotly contested division, except it's going to be hotly contested for other reasons than the AFC South. And quite honestly, I don't know when we're releasing these because we have a weird release schedule and we're recording way out of order. Who cares about the details on the back end? All you care about is who's joining me to talk about the NFC South. And as always, in all the division previews, I am joined here by our Eagles superfan, James. Hello, James.
Hey, Pod. I promise to be nice to all four teams in this division. Okay, I'm sorry. I'm lying about that.
Okay.
I'm lying.
Okay. That made more sense. And we also have an actual super fan from this division joining us, and it is Chris, who represents the New Orleans Saints. Hello, Chris. Oh, and already the kids were being loud. So, Chris.
And we were still muted. How y'all doing this morning?
We are doing just fine. If this is the first time that you've been listening to us, hey, thanks for taking the time to take a listen. And tell a friend, follow us, subscribe, wherever great podcasts are heard. We are everywhere. Apple Podcasts, Google, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Pandora. People love us on Pandora, and I'll bet you didn't even know Pandora was a place you can listen to us. But yes, you can listen to us on Pandora. So if you have the Pandora app, go and listen to the Next Fan Up podcast there. You can also email us, nextfanup@gmail.com. You can tweet us at NFU Podcast. You can continue the conversation with us. It's a good place to do it. Facebook.com/NFU Podcast. We are on all the social media sites. We have an Instagram, but I mean, you want pictures, and I don't have the time to go get a picture to tell you about the podcast. It's just annoying. I'm not very good at the Instagram because I'm 45, 46 years old now. And my son refuses to do this, even though I've promised to give him money for it. All right. Let's talk about the NFC South. Again, just a reminder to everyone as we've been doing these predictions. These are my game-by-game predictions. I've gone through every single game of the upcoming 2020 season. I've predicted winners and losers in every single game. This year, this is the 6th year that I have done this on this particular podcast, and I've been doing this for years, even when I was working at ESPN. This year, I've introduced the concept of a lock win and a lock loss. And these are games in which I feel extremely confident that the team is either going to win or extremely confident that the team has no chance of winning that game whatsoever. And that gives you a better idea, especially since this is July when you're listening to this, of what the perception is of that team going into the season. Because honestly, there's no way you can predict the outcome of a game that's played in the third week of December. It's just... I would like to find that person and then, make the $1 million from their prediction.
Also, disclaimer about Pod's predictions. They're kind of like the Death Star, and what actually happens is Luke Skywalker.
Oh, okay. Well, sometimes I have been right on a number of occasions, but then
on a number of occasions.
Well, every now and then the blind nut will find the squirrel. And I said it.
Super Bowl 52.
Panthers are the worst team. We go worst to first, and the Panthers are the worst team in this particular division. I have predicted them with a record of 5-11. They're guaranteed losses at the Bucs, at the Saints, at the Chiefs, and there are more losses, obviously, along the way. They have moved on from their quarterback, Cam Newton. They have decided to go with good old Teddy Two Gloves, Teddy Bridgewater, who made himself a nice little deal backing up in New Orleans last season. And so now he's got the chance to start. And I don't know if things are going to go well, but they also have a new coach and Matt Rule. And so we don't really have a pretty good idea of what we're going to see here out of the Panthers, Chris?
You know, it's hard because the conversation has to start with Teddy Bridgewater. And what I saw out of Teddy Bridgewater 4 of the 5 games he started in New Orleans was somebody who was slow to hit the window, checked down almost every play, and wouldn't take chances downfield. Now, I love Teddy Bridgewater. I want to see him be successful. He might be the nicest guy in the NFL. Unfortunately, he might also be the worst quarterback in this division. You consider with everything going on with the pandemic and how that's going to affect a new coach like Matt Rule coming in, implementing a new system with a new quarterback, it's going to be rough. He also loses leaders like Greg Olsen and Luke Kuechly. Yeah, it's hard to be optimistic about the Panthers this year.
James, their tight end group, they mentioned the loss. Chris mentioned the loss of Greg Olsen there. You're looking at Ian Thomas, Chris Manhertz, and probably one of the best names in the NFL, by the way. And then your wide receivers. I mean, I know a lot of people seem to be excited about Curtis Samuel and DJ Moore, but I mean, is that enough? And then you bring in Robbie Anderson, whom I never thought was a number 1 with the New York Jets. He was always a good number 2. I just don't see it other than Christian McCaffrey, and there's no depth behind Christian McCaffrey.
No, that absolutely no depth. And the more intriguing thing about this is that you have a rookie head coach who's offensive minded, and yet in the draft, they went all defense. All 7 picks on defense. They drafted no offensive players. So I'm trying to figure out what – and I didn't watch Rule, you know, his teams in college when they played, so I have no idea what to expect. I know about as much as him as my next-door neighbor, which is virtually nothing. As far as Teddy Bridgewater, look, yeah, he did do a lot of checkdowns, but you have to also understand that his last stop, which was in New Orleans, he backed up a guy who probably took every single snap in practice, you know, aside from being injured. So you're throwing him in there the moment Breeze gets injured and you're telling him to perform at the same level. Not going to happen. And then when he finally does get the reps, he's got to get up to speed. It's one thing to know it on a chalkboard or a notebook. It's another thing to actually do it on the field. And when you don't have that practice and experience time to get in there, because Breeze, like most other, you know, Hall of Fame quarterbacks will tell you, they don't let their backup take any snaps in practice. They take all the snaps. So I think that was to his detriment. Even though he did perform well when he had his opportunities, I want to believe that he's what I saw the last time we saw him play in Minnesota, which is taking a team that was 10-6 and on the verge of a rise into the playoffs. And I'm hoping that Teddy Bridgewater is still out there before the devastating knee injury. But I don't know if there's enough talent around him outside of Christian McCaffrey to get that done. The offensive line is solid. You got Okun at 1 tackle, Daly, Paradis, Miller, and Morton at the other tackle. It's an okay offensive line. It could get better in some spots, probably at those guard positions. But we haven't seen anything yet. And like you said, this offseason, considering what's going on with the pandemic, how much communication is he getting with the head coach as far as the offensive philosophy and not actually being to get on the field and run through some of these reps as far as what the offense is going to look like is going to hurt this team when the season starts.
By the way, I just double-checked. Russell Okun is only 32. I thought he was his number 76. I feel like Russell Okun's been around forever.
He has.
Well, his knees are 76.
Oh, okay.
Ouch.
That makes more sense.
He's got the knees of a 76-year-old. Real quick, that might be the most puzzling trade outside of the Texans that happened all offseason. How do you trade Trey Turner for Okun? That's still, and as you said, their guards really weak. They just got rid of one of the best ones and sent them to San Diego or L.A.
I'm going to crush Carolina fans' hopes even more. In my Dynasty League, the Next Fan Up Dynasty League, one of the key pieces on my team is Christian McCaffrey. I need a lot out of Christian McCaffrey. And that is a guarantee that Christian McCaffrey gets hurt and misses a good portion of the year this year. I already am missing out on Deebo Samuel, who was my guy on the wide receiving core. So Christian McCaffrey, sorry, it's my fault. I've hexed you. You have the PodVader curse. Sorry, everyone. I had to share. But in any defensively, as you mentioned, this is where they made a lot of moves in the draft to add to some pieces that they already had. Yetur Gross-Matos drafted in the second round. Derek Brown was drafted in the first round to go along with Kawan Short, Stephen Weatherly. At the linebacking core, we've got their first round pick from last year, Brian Burns, Shaq Thompson, Tahir Whitehead, Marquise Haynes, and there's some other depth in there on the linebacking core. And in their secondary, they drafted Jeremy Chin in the second round at strong safety. They have Trey Boston at free safety, corners, Eli Apple, Dante Jackson, and there's no other names that are worth mentioning when it comes to the secondary. So I think it's safe to say their defense is a work in progress, Chris.
Well, yeah. Excuse me. Anytime you bring in that many rookies, you're going to have a hell of an offseason, which they may not get to have. And I love Yetur Gross-Matos coming into this draft. I thought he's a great value at round 2. But he's not good enough to make up for the loss of somebody like Luke Kuechly. I remember watching Whitehead and with the Raiders last year. I've watched him with Detroit enough years. I'm not comfortable relying on him as one of my starters. So you have a lot of weaknesses. And Eli Apple. I'm trying to skip by Eli Apple because I like him a lot, but I think we all kind of know who he is at this point in his career. And as you said, he's one of the few worth naming. So it's going to be rough. Jeremy Chin has a lot of potential, but what are the odds of him coming in his rookie year out of, what was it, Illinois State, to really make an impact? So, yeah, it's looking grim for Panthers fans this season for sure.
Yes, Southern Illinois for Jeremy Chin, and this defense is clearly the weakness of this team now because any and everybody that they could rely on is gone, with the exception of Kawan Short. And, I mean, he's an interior lineman, and with names out there like Fletcher Cox and Aaron Donald and other defensive tackles who pretty much have made names for themselves in the league, he kind of gets lost in the shuffle as just a guy compared to everybody else after them. Secondary-wise, I don't see how this unit slows any receiving core throughout the season. The Panthers may find themselves in quite a bit of shootout.
And mind you, you have some of the best wide receivers in the league on the other 3 teams in this division.
It's definitely not looking good.
I mean, who do you want Eli Apple lining up against? If you go just the number 2 receivers in the league, twice a year he has to face Emmanuel Sanders, Chris Godwin, and Calvin Ridley.
Yeah.
Being a Saints fan, I can tell you how he matches up against 2 of those receivers. It ain't pretty.
So 5-11 actually might be a little optimistic here for the Panthers. Their 5 victories, week 3 at the Chargers, week 4 hosting the Cardinals, week 8 hosting the Falcons, week 10 hosting the Bucks, and week 16 at the Redskins. The Falcons-Bucks is just because I tend to split division games unless I feel super confident about your team that you're just going to sweep. And quite honestly, I mean, we're going to get there, but the Bucks game might be one that I would change.
Interesting.
Yeah. You know, like I said, we're going to get there, but not yet. The third place team, as I have predicted it for this particular season, is the Atlanta Falcons. This is a team, by the way, that I've always had high hopes for because I think they have talent. They've always had talent, but for some reason they never achieved the talent that they have. And when they did, they gave up a 28-3 lead in the Super Bowl. this is from MJ, our Atlanta Falcons superfan. Assuming we have a 2020 season, I'm feeling very good about the Dirty Birds. Assuming we're not decimated by injuries, I see a season with 12 wins. Yep, I said it, 12 wins. I really like what I saw in the second half of last season, and with the changes that were made with the defensive coaching staff, I think the season will start off nicely. I think the problem, MJ, with 12 wins is your team wasn't the only one that made changes this season in the division. So it's going to be tough. I don't have you at 12 wins. We'll get to my prediction in just a second. The injuries that have stunted our seasons in the last 2 years are exactly what the Dirty Birds needed to focus on this year's draft, and they did exactly that with picks at corner, defensive end, linebacker, and safety. Defense definitely added some much-needed depth. Out of this draft class, I would definitely keep an eye on A.J. Terrell out of Clemson, who's known for being tough as nails and usually being in the right place at the right time. Chris, you're a draft Nick. Tell me a little bit about A.J. Terrell.
He's overdrafted.
Then
A.J. Terrell was more.
Wait, you said enough. Don't leave it. You drop the mic.
Goodness gracious.
Drop the mic. That's all you needed to say. Then you have Marlon Davidson out of Auburn. He is very versatile and strong as an ox. He's the first true freshman to start in the Auburn defense since '85. So there's definitely something special about this kid. How about Marlon Davidson, Chris?
No, he's actually solid. That was a really good pick.
Okay. On the offensive side of the ball, our pick out of Temple, Matt Hennessy, will have some time to learn from Alex Mack, one of the best centers in the game. Once Mack's contract is up, expect to see Hennessy slide into that position and be a force on the O-line. Well, that's just depth. When looking at the returning veterans on this team on offense and defense, they're expected to play as well as any. Both of these groups have played together. They know each other's strengths and weaknesses, know how to help each other. Plus, they will be a great group for the rookies to train under and get more experience. Assuming we have a 2020 season, I definitely feel good about the Dirty Birds. I expect to see some wonderful things from this team. I mean, I agree that there is talent on this team. Unfortunately, like I said, there were other teams that made moves and improved, and I see 8-8 as the final record for the Atlanta Falcons. Let's start on the offensive side of the ball, where the biggest change here is at the running back position. No longer Devontae Freeman or Tevin Coleman. I mean, Tevin Coleman's been gone for a couple of years now. Brian Hill has been like the guy fantasy pundits have been drooling over for years, but Todd Gurley ends up becoming the guy to get the ball handed off to him from Matt Ryan. And we joked about Russell Okung's 76-year-old knees. How old is Todd Gurley's knees?
85.
Probably pretty close.
Look, and I hope I hope Todd Gurley is healthy. This is one of the signings that took place after the pandemic that kind of confused people because he didn't get in for a physical or a workout. They just signed him. And kudos for upgrading the position because I have railed against oh gosh, I don't even want to bring up his name. He's the reason that Matt Ryan got blown up in Super Bowl 51 because he missed a block on Hightower. But Gurley, Ito Smith, Brian Hill should be a solid backfield for the Falcons. My issue with this offense, with all the talent littered across this roster, is Matt Ryan. Because with the exception of the Super Bowl year, and that one season, I believe they were 14-2 and choked to the Green Bay Packers in the playoffs. Aside from those two seasons, Matt Ryan's been, I would say, at best good, at worst average. And it doesn't do anything to make me feel like this team is a legitimate threat week in and week out. Now, unfortunately, the downside to this offense is they play up and down to their talent. They do consistently lose games they should win, and win games you're thinking they have no chance being in. So with that still lingering over them, and they've been that way at least for the last 20 years, I'm looking at the schedule and I'm trying to find 10 wins, let alone 12 that MJ is predicting here. I mean, they still have to play the Bucs and the Saints. Even if they sweep the Panthers, games outside of their division, I mean, I hope they beat the Cowboys, but they open up against the Seahawks. You know, they have games at Green Bay, at Minnesota. The game against the Broncos is at home, so that's good. They still have to go out west to LA and at Kansas City at the end of the season. So these are not slam dunks. And, you know, if they luck into wins, congratulations. But 12? A bit ambitious.
And even with that, teams like Denver, I fear Denver more indoors than I do outdoors right now. They went into this draft and they found speed at every position they could in offense. That's a team I think Denver could be sneaky good. They may not be a playoff contender yet, but that's somebody who's going to beat teams that are better than them when they get the opportunity to. So, yeah.
I'm not very high on Denver, but I get what you're saying. And the way that I've laid out the Falcons win-losses at 8-8, I have only one guaranteed loss, and that is at the Chiefs in Week 16. This is one of those quirks that we've mentioned in a couple of these division previews, that there are some scheduling quirks along the way, and this is one of them. They don't play the Bucs until Week 15. They host them, and then they finish the season at the Bucs. So it's one of those, they play the same team twice within 3 weeks sort of things. I have them losing all of those games. All their last 3 games is, I see the second half of their schedule as being where they're going to have their difficulties, but where they luck out schedule wise, James, is starting with the Seahawks at home. I've given the Falcons the win in that game and the loss at the Cowboys. And that's, again, mainly because the Falcons are home and the Seahawks don't like to play on the road that much. And it is a West Coast team going East Coast in the first week of the season. It's just that spells not good news for the Seattle Seahawks. Bears at Packers, Panthers. We just spent way too much time talking about the Panthers. I actually don't have the Falcons sweeping the Panthers, but I could very easily see that happening. But I mean, it really is the fact that I just think the Saints and the Buccaneers are just that good this year. And it's going to be tough for a team that is known to underachieve to really pick up their game and make it happen. Their offensive line, anchored by left tackle Jake Matthews. They've got James Carpenter now at left guard, Alex Mack at the center, who's always been solid, Chris Lindstrom at right guard, Caleb McGarry, their first-round draft choice from last season, at the right tackle position. Again, it's one of those, it's not the worst offensive line in football. It might be, this might be one of those teams where it actually might be a top 10, but probably is 11 offensive line. And for those of you who didn't listen to the AFC South preview, you are not going to understand that joke. The tight end position is interesting because they got rid of Austin Hooper. They bring in Hayden Hurst. As I'll talk to our draft expert, Jarrett Pinkney went undrafted because that's a sneaky guy that could probably contribute at the tight end spot. Chris, that was meant for you. It's kind of a question.
No, I know. I'm just trying to figure out how I shrug over the phone.
Oh, my God.
All right. Well, then.
Oh, flipping sides.
The defensive side of the ball, Alan Bailey at left defensive end with Tackerist McKinley at the right side. Grady Jarrett centers everything with Tyler Davison. They drafted Marlon Davidson, as we mentioned, in the second round. He'll probably rotate in and probably will unseat this Tyler Davison character. There's also Dante Fowler Jr., who will probably switch spots. You know, he's more of a rusher. That you can't really label him a linebacker or defensive end, really. Chris Harris, Deion Jones, AJ Terrell. AJ Terrell's a corner. I keep doing that, guys. Stop it.
It's
Soderbergh.
a 4-3, not a 3-4.
Deion Buchanan, who might be more of a safety than a linebacker, but they've got him listed here at middle linebacker. I mean, it's interesting, but you got AJ Terrell, Keanu Neal, Ricardo Allen, Isaiah Oliver, those are your starters in the secondary. DeMonte Casey. But, I mean, the problems with the Falcons have always, and especially with their secondary, is they have to stay healthy. And in a division, as we just mentioned, that feature combinations of wide receivers where their number 2 could be a number 1 on somebody else's team, it's not a secondary that I think is going to slow down the Saints and the Bucs.
Excuse me. No, but the middle of that defensive line, if you have any kind of weak spot at guard or center, whether it be due to injury or just overall talent, Davidson's he's not a stud, but that's a really solid starter. I watched him for 4 years in New Orleans. He's good. He's a very talented nose tackle. Jarrett is one of the best in the NFL. You add Marlon Davidson to that, and then Takk McKinley on the outside with Fowler Jr. That's what's going to be what keeps them in games. One of the few bright spots I can say about Dan Quinn is he gets a lot out of the players in his secondary. He coaches them very well. So they're going to win games they shouldn't because of offensive line play on the other team. But, yeah, you're absolutely right. There's not a whole lot to get excited about, but there are some bright spots.
Pod, I might have to disagree with you on the defensive outlook because under Dan Quinn, the secondary has been solid more so than good. Not great, not horribly bad. They do have their lapses. The front 7 is where my concern is because that's the unit that's always underperformed for this defense as far as getting pressure on the quarterback consistently, having a guy step up and lead this team with double-digit sacks. Hasn't happened under Dan Quinn's tenure, and he's a defensive specialist primarily with the secondary. So the secondary's been solid, but that front 7, they've got to step it up.
This was also a team that struggled to find a kicker. They settled on Young-Ho Koo. That'll be a position to watch as the season progresses. See if the kid can actually maintain that kicker spot. All right. This is going to be an interesting comment, and I want to reiterate on this particular division preview that I'm not picking a boyfriend team this season. My husbands need all the love that they can get.
Mm-hmm.
That said,
and so does his new boyfriend.
The team that I've picked as the second place team in this division, I feel more confident about them than I do about the team I have in first, just based on the lock victories. I have 6 lock victories for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, whom I have finishing at 12-4 in second place in the NFC South. And yes, a ton of that has to do with the fact that you have the greatest quarterback of all time now in Tom Brady and the greatest tight end of all time in Rob Gronkowski, added to an offense that features Mike Evans and Chris Godwin and also has Cameron Brate and O.J. Howard. The question will be, how well can they protect old man Brady? Because the offensive line isn't one that's, hasn't been great. They did draft Tristan Wirfs in the first round, but there's still some question marks on that offensive line, and Brady's going to have to get rid of that ball rather quickly.
Mm-hmm. Not your boyfriends, right? Six lock victories, and not your boyfriends. Okay. While we're on offense, and look, starters aside, I'm worried about the depth at some positions, primarily old man Brady's backups, which include Blaine Gabbert, Ryan
It's the real
Griffin,
American Blaine Gabbert.
and
How
Reed
dare you?
Bennett.
Yeah, the real American.
Buccaneers fans, please pray for Brady's health because remember, you gave up Jameis Winston. And don't get me wrong.
Do you not know about the
Jameis...
TB12 method? The man sold his soul to the devil for the Fountain of Youth. I mean,
Bucs fans, pray for his health.
He'll be
because
fine.
While Winston's season was up and down, statistically, minus the interceptions, it was one of the best in league history. However, the drop-off
minus the interceptions, the first guy to go 30-30.
Hey, look, what if I told you that there was a guy out there? Okay, never mind. The drop-off from Brady to Gabbard is like the fall from Everest to something like 5,000 feet below sea level. I mean, this is an astronomical drop-off in that quarterback room. And again, I don't wish injury on any player, but again, it will be interesting to see this team play should something happen to Brady, because saying the wheels are going to fall off is a gross understatement.
Yeah, but not for nothing. We could say that about every team. And we have said it about a couple of teams.
Well, we've said it about several teams, but I wouldn't say every team. My second concern with this offense is running back, because they didn't get much out of this position last year, and it doesn't look like they did much this year. I'm trying to remember if they drafted anyone.
They did. Keyshawn Vaughn. Chris, how's Keyshawn Vaughn as a running back?
Okay.
I mean, he's a solid backup.
Raymond Calais in the 7th round as well from Louisiana Lafayette. So they did draft 2 running backs in the 3rd and 7th rounds, respectively. I don't have faith in Ronald Jones being the lead back, though.
All right, Chris, tell us about the Tampa Bay running backs.
I mean, he said it great, actually. I mean, Vaughn's a solid backup, but Ronald Jones has been in the league long enough for us to kind of see who he is. With a better quarterback, with better offensive line play, he could improve. But I think at this point we should be done giving him the benefit of the doubt.
The Buccaneers front 7 on defense is super solid. Ndamukong Suh, Vita Vea, William Golston, Jason Pierre-Paul, Devin White, Levante David, Shaq Barrett, who almost won the sack title last season.
For a new contract.
Yeah, well, he's the franchise player this year. That is definitely the strength of this defense, because the cornerbacks, there's not a name on the cornerbacks that I can say that you're like, oh yeah, I know that guy.
Antoine Winfield Jr.
Unless you're from the NFC South. They drafted Antoine Winfield Jr. in the 2nd round at safety. And they've got Jordan Whitehead, Justin Evans, Mike Edwards as other safety options. But the secondary is definitely not as strong as the front 7 for this defense, Chris.
No, I agree. Antoine Winfield Jr. is a stud when he's healthy, so that'll be interesting to see how it plays out. But we are talking about the 28th ranked defense from last year, I believe. And they did make a lot of changes. So even though on paper that front 7 looks great, they didn't produce a lot last year. They're still 28th. So
hey, last year this defense kept them in every single shootout they played in.
That's a solid point, James.
That's as optimistic as MJ's 12-4.
Well, then there you go. See, I just found where the optimism was misplaced. It was meant for the Buccaneers at 12-4.
So on paper, this is probably one of the best front 7s in the league. But again, paper doesn't translate to the field. So hopefully things improve.
So interestingly, I have said that with the way that the virus has caused things to change with the world, I ultimately think that the Buccaneers should have trouble gelling, especially early on, except I don't have that in my predictions, because while I have them losing at the Saints in week 1, they have 3 lock victories right after that, with hosting the Panthers, at the Broncos, and then hosting the Chargers. So
you didn't lock them against the Bears?
I did not lock them because it's at the Bears. It's an outdoor game. It's an outdoor game in the North, and while Tom Brady can play there, I don't know how well the rest of the skill players. Well, listen, it gets cold in October in Chicago, and it also gets windy. And frankly, if you want to know where Tom Brady's weaknesses are, besides rushing him up the middle, put him in a windy game. He does not like the wind. Anyway, 12-4. That's 1 loss more than the team I have in first place in the division. And Chris, I have your Saints going 13-3 this upcoming season. They will be the best team in the NFC. Your 3 losses I have slated at week 8 at the Bears, week 9 at the Bucks, and week 14 at the Eagles. And those are all 50-50 games. I don't have a lock loss for you. I do have 3 lock victories for you, and they are all in the month of October at the Lions, hosting the Chargers. You win your bye week, and then you will beat the Panthers at home as your locks. But you have a first place schedule, so you're playing against all of the best teams in the league from last year.
I mean, that happens when you win your division 3 years in a row. It's a much improved team in this offseason, which I know kind of sounds odd because there's been very few additions, but they've all been very strong. Emmanuel Sanders as a number 2, he's the best number 2 receiver Drew Brees has had, period. If you want to look at how good the number 2 receiver is last year, look at Michael Thomas's stats. Alvin Kamara, back injury, high ankle sprain, and a deep bone bruise in his knee. He was at maybe 70% last year. Getting him back healthy was going to be huge. Plus, getting rid of Larry Warford by itself is addition by subtraction. Then you bring in somebody like Cesar Ruiz, who was one of my favorite players in the draft.
James cried about the Vikings stealing his wide receiver. I'm going to cry about the Saints stealing my center/guard in Cesar Ruiz. That was a huge pick. That was the guy I wanted to see wearing a Patriots uniform.
It's an absolute great pick. I mean, this gives the Saints, I'll argue, the best offensive line in football. And that's with Andres Pete, who's not great. But that's all they have, is they have one person who's not great. Then you have 4 other guys who you could put top 5 at their position. So providing Cesar Ruiz plays up to the potential he has. So, no, I'm really excited going into the season. They just have to stay healthy. You know, I'm assuming I'm like the 6th person that said if they get Jadeveon Clowney, that's only because there was new rumors stirred up yesterday about it. I think they can go 13-3 without him. With him, you're talking a very, very deep playoff push. So, no, there's not really a lot of holes. Well, we'll go through the depth chart here, but this is a really, really solid team all the way around.
Well, you already went through pretty much the entire offense. Your tight ends, Jared Cook, Josh Hill, Adam Troutman was a guy you drafted in the 3rd round. Another guy that was surprised the Patriots didn't draft because he was available at both times they drafted tight ends. And a guy that I thought would make a great Patriot. So now he makes a great Saint. I am a little curious about your quarterback room.
I'm a little concerned here because I'm looking at the Saints depth chart and I'm surprised that it doesn't say Taysom Hill behind all the starters.
Well, and that's where I was going. I want to know a little bit more about the quarterback room because you have old man Breeze, you have Taysom Hill, whom everybody's hyping up, and I mean people are reading into what Sean Payton says about Taysom Hill, and you also have Mr. 30 for 30. Let me tell you a story, Jameis Winston.
We'll start with Breeze, the best quarterback in the division.
After Tom Brady.
Yeah, I said it. Okay. I'm a diehard Michigan fan. I love Tom Brady. But even when Doc Brown would go back in the time, he was still old as hell. Tom Brady, not the Tom Brady of 6 years ago. Drew Brees last year played better than Brady, and he tore a ligament in his throwing hand. So, no, Brees he is what he is. He's going to be the day one starter. There's no question about it. Taysom Hill's the backup, and Taysom Hill is the starter next year, providing he doesn't screw up the opportunity. Jameis Winston is basically the Saints getting a look at somebody and buying a draft pick. I mean, he should, with any hope, do the same thing that Teddy Bridgewater did this year for him, which was be a solid backup for him, and then 2 years later, you get a number 3 comp pick for him, or a 3rd round comp pick. So, yeah, I know people hate the idea of Taysom Hill and can't fathom the possibility of him being a quarterback, but when he's in at quarterback, he produces. He plays well. So I'm excited about it. This is probably, with not having training camps this year, it's killing the entire Saints fan base because all we want to see is Taysom Hill under center. We want to see a much larger sample size. But as of right now, he's the backup. And like you said, he's the backup at basically every position on offense. And one more guy. There's go ahead.
No, I was just going to so the regular season is not where I have questions with the Saints offense. It's the postseason. And each of the last 3 years, your runs come up short. Specifically in the last two, Drew Brees hasn't played well. That NFC Championship game that you all got robbed of against the Rams, notwithstanding, even after that play call, he was horrible for the next 6 or 7 plays you all had on offense. And last year against the Vikings, he didn't play particularly well either. That was a game that I pretty much had locked for the entire weekend. Like, there's no way Minnesota should come in and have a chance because I was expecting you all to run up and down the field on them. And granted, Minnesota has one of the better defenses in the league. It's a game that I felt that shouldn't have been close, and I feel like that fell mostly on the offense because they weren't sustaining drives when they should have.
Well, and that's
your thoughts from going into the postseason.
Going back to that Vikings game really quick, Brees did not play well. Rewatch that game, and you'll see why they cut Larry Warford. And it wasn't just Larry Warford; it was Andres Pete as well. Every passing down, Minnesota took Everett Griffin and Hunter, their 2 stud defensive ends, and brought them in over top of the guards. They exploited a huge weakness on that front 5, on that offensive line. So that improvement in itself should improve Drew Brees' play in the playoffs. Also, Emmanuel Sanders gives him a number 2 option. The blueprint's been out forever in New Orleans, and that's create pressure up front. Warford had a couple great years in New Orleans, but when he was having a great season, Max Unger was not. So there's always kind of been this blueprint to get in his face from up the middle and bracket Thomas, because there's no number 2 there. So with Jared Cook getting into the fold as he did last year, with Emmanuel Sanders, and with better offensive line play, that fixes that problem as far as I'm concerned. But I do want to touch on quarterback really quick here because there's a 4th guy that I'm really excited about, Tommy Stevens. He's a Taysom Hill clone. And the whole idea of bringing him in, he's a player that they stole from Carolina in the 7th round. His entire blueprint to making this roster is to do what Taysom Hill does on special teams and as tight end on offense. But he's also being groomed to be that backup quarterback next season. So a fun name to watch in preseason. Watch for number 1. Watch for Tommy Stevens. This kid's fun to watch.
Do you have room on the roster to keep him?
I hope. One of the things that I'll give the Saints this year is they built a lot of versatile depth. So picking up players like James Hurst, you have Nick Eason, you have Will Clapp, and really everybody on the offensive line can all play in multiple positions. So the Saints have the ability to not carry as many on their game day roster with hopes of being able to carry that 4th quarterback.
That will be interesting. To carry 4 quarterbacks is quite hefty when most teams nowadays only carry 2. The practice squads are going to be bigger, but I have a feeling bigger practice squads means more poaching for other teams.
It's a long shot for him to make the roster, but Tommy Stevens he's a quarterback on depth chart, but he's more of a gunner on special teams, and that's where he'll get his position.
Speaking of depth, you have some depth, especially in the linebacking core and in your secondary. The question that I have from a defensive standpoint, because you do have a solid defense, is all about the health of one Sheldon Rankins, because it does seem if Rankins is hurt and he misses games, that's where the defense starts to break down.
Rankins' injury pass is a concern. It's less of a concern for me than Marcus Davenport's, but they've done a good job. They retained David Onyemata, who he didn't just take Rankins' spot as the starter because of injury. He outplayed him. And then you have players like Shai Tuttle. You have, Taylor Starworth on our practice squad was a guy who the year before made the game day roster and played very well. So they have a lot of depth interior. It's the outside that bothers me. Last year against the Niners, they lost both Rankins and Davenport, and the Saints pass rush died. So hopefully Zach Bond can come in and help add some depth.
Another draft pick I love. You got three guys that I all wanted to see as Patriots. It's so annoying.
But that's good. They only had 3 picks. No, I think this going into this offseason, they definitely found their weaknesses and they added to it. They went in, they filled that gap. My biggest concern is boundary corner. You have Lattimore and Janoris Jenkins. That's arguably the best combination in the NFC South, if not the NFC. But after that, you have nothing but slot corners. So if either Jenkins or Lattimore get hurt, they have nobody to fill that outside. So there definitely needs to be some kind of depth added somewhere, because neither Lattimore or Jenkins have been a fountain of health recently. So that would be my big concern.
So let me ask this question, because opposite of Cam Jordan, slotted right now is Davenport. You have Edwards and Braun, who actually steps up to be that guy opposite of Cam Jordan.
Oh, it's Davenport. I have to eat so much crow about Marcus Davenport, and my prediction of him on our draft shows, he's 10 times better than I gave him credit for. He just has to stay on the field.
Okay.
Davenport's a force when he's there.
Okay. Second question. Kiko Alonso. To me, that's the weakest part of this defense is middle linebacker. He's shown flashes of good, solid play, and a lot of times it's kind of like, is he even out there on defense? It looks like you're 10 on 11 sometimes. How long can you all ride with Alonso at that position?
Well, Alonso he's a backup. He only started last year because Alex Anzalone got hurt. And even then, the Saints primarily play a nickel, so the starters for A.J. Klein and Demario Davis. As of right now, at middle linebacker, he's slated to be third on depth. So I don't even know if he makes the team. Zach Bond is being cross-trained as a edge rusher and middle linebacker. And then you have Alex Anzalone, who's the normal starter at that spot.
Okay, and we already talked about the secondary, but I want to thank you for the loan of Malcolm Jenkins for those several years that we had him in Philadelphia. Got us a ring. I appreciate that. I am sad to see him back with your squad.
If we ever needed his leadership, it was this offseason. I love Jenkins. I absolutely have. He was my draft crush, even though he played for the Buckeyes when he was drafted. I can't be happier that he's back. It gives the ability for Chauncey Gardner-Johnson, who was a draft steal last year and was a stud in the secondary, to just really play nickel. He no longer has to switch between safety and slot. So he makes this team better in so many ways. So I'm glad to have him back. Thank you for cutting him, because
it wasn't cutting him. It was contract dispute. He wanted more money than we were willing to offer, which I thought was stupid. Just give him the money. Easy for me to say I don't have it to give, but
I don't want to get into a political conversation here because, frankly, we don't have a lot of time left. From peeling back the curtain, I think it's a conversation that we can do an entire podcast on. But I do want to ask the question of how will this team recover from Drew Brees' comments and the backlash that he took from all of his teammates?
I think it'll be fine. It's hard to broach the subject without going overly political, so bear with me. What Drew Brees said was not surprising to some of us, but it was hurtful for a lot of the players in that locker room. They've since seemed to move on. Malcolm Jenkins, speaking of, seems to be the only one that's still – he says he's okay with it. You can kind of see it in his eyes. He's still pretty upset. But for the most part, this locker room was built just from the top down with high character guys. This isn't really Drew Brees' locker room, and it hasn't been for about 2 years. Players like Demario Davis, players like Cam Jordan have really stepped up and taken over and created this great atmosphere where players like Teddy Bridgewater is dancing after every game and wants to sign. Jameis Winston signed here for $1 million to be a third-string quarterback because of this locker room. So I think they'll be okay. I think it's kind of done. But, yeah, I mean, he just has to shut up. As long as he doesn't reignite a fire, I think he's good. And his track record with his charities and everything, I think, plays a lot into that.
Let me add a little bit to this, Chris. I think that Jenkins struggled with accepting it because you say he said that he's okay with it, but you can see it in his face. That's probably due to the fact that Drew Brees, his statement earlier this year was a repeat of what he said 4 years ago when the entire anthem protest movement started with Colin Kaepernick kneeling. So it in a way, his initial retraction or apology, whatever you want to call it, from some outside of the Saints locker room, and I'll just speak for myself specifically, and probably to what Malcolm Jenkins is feeling, is, I'm not going to say completely disingenuous, but somewhat like he was bullied into the reversal because of his teammates, not because he actually believes what he said that he apologized for. Because when you repeat something a second time and double down on it from years prior, and you don't change your stance because you're ignoring what's actually going on and you're taking away from what the protests are about, that in and of itself makes everything afterwards, even if good intention, seems somewhat disingenuous. Now, I will say, yeah, his charities, all good. He was beloved in the community. I've seen videos on Twitter where fans are outside the New Orleans Superdomes speaking disparagingly of him and chanting F Drew Brees. I've seen an article within the last day or so about his family sponsoring a Black College Hall of Fame event. So it's good to see him going through the actions of doing things. Like you said, when things come back in the fall or whenever these players can get around each other and see each other face to face, that'll be interesting. You're right. It's no longer his locker room. Quite a few of the African-American players on this team, because of their social justice stances, have stepped to the forefront as leaders on the squad. And you couple that with Malcolm Jenkins coming back, basically what he's done with the Players Coalition and the things that he's done in communities both there in New Orleans and in Philadelphia. I'm not going to say it's going to cause some tension, but I don't think things will be as copacetic as we would like them to be day one when they all see each other. Well, but I do think some players have moved. Some players have moved on from it. Yes,
I completely agree, and he deserves every amount of criticism that he got for his comments. And yes, that's part of when you make an egregious mistake as he did, you are the one who voluntarily brought in all of his criticism. So that's something that he's going to have to work with and he's going to have to live with. I'm not going to sit here as a Saints fan and defend what he did. I'm a human being before that. So no, he absolutely has a lot of trust to regain. But I will say, he has a track record. And that track record, I think, is what made it – that track record is why Michael Thomas is not crushing him right now on Twitter.
Right.
That track record is why Malcolm Jenkins, even through the grit of his teeth, is stating, we're fine. Mm-hmm. They don't seem fine. But Drew Brees, from this point forward, has got to do the right thing. And that started with a tear-filled apology to his teammates before he did one publicly. That was him calling Malcolm Jenkins. That was him calling Demario Davis. That was him reaching out to the players. Still has a ton of work to do. We all do.
Absolutely.
Where he doesn't need to do work is win football games, because I've got them at 13-3. And that wins the division. I said they would finish with the best record in the NFC, so that will give them the first seed in the playoffs. I have the Buccaneers at 12-4. They will take a wild card. Interesting, it will be the tiebreaker for the Buccaneers with that wild card spot. Also interesting that they'll finish at 12-4, where there are other division winners in the NFC who will have worse records than the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So we'll be doing a postseason prediction show at some point down the road, but that will wrap things up here for the NFC South. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, please send them to nextfanup@gmail.com. You can tweet us at NFU Podcast, facebook.com/NFU Podcast, a great way to continue the conversation. And of course, if you just found us, thanks for listening. And tell a friend about us. We can be found anywhere great podcasts are heard: Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Pandora is a thing. Make sure you subscribe or follow so you never miss a show, because I don't know when that postseason prediction show is going to come out, but it will be coming out for sure after all of our division previews have been aired. And with that, I leave you with a fine. There you have it.
How you doing? How are you, buddy? Trying to figure out who's going to play? Yeah. So are we.